Thank you very much for being here this morning. Thank you to Stuart and for putting together this great event. So my name is Chong. I'm from the SGX. I've been at the exchange for 13 years. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, and then after that, I will tell you about the market structure, and after that, give you some ideas for the listing rules and some case studies as well. So you may ask, what do I do at SGX? The brochure says family office, and how is that relevant? So the exchange is like this. It's like many other companies. I joined the exchange 13 years ago, and they gave me an assignment. And like many other corporates, after a few years, if you don't die or quit, you get another assignment. So this has happened to me a few times. So these assignments are all additional. I started my career doing origination for mineral oil and gas companies. I also then took a role looking after all the listed companies in SGX. And now I also run the family office team. And I'll explain how that's relevant to mining companies shortly. So this is a slide that talks about Singapore as a global strategic hub. And in particular, it's used to talk about why family offices set up in Singapore. I was at an event last year, the Milken Institute event, where I heard Ray Dalio speak. Ray, as you know, is the founder of Bridgewater, one of the world's largest hedge funds. And he has set up his family office here. And this is what he explained. He said, if you want to set up your family office, you have to look at three factors. One is the country's balance sheet. You need a country with a strong balance sheet. And in fact, Singapore is AAA rated. Second, you have to pick a country that has the right geopolitical leaning that you're comfortable with. And thirdly, you have to pick a place where you're comfortable with and where everything works. So I think that, in summary, is why a lot of global family offices have set up in Singapore. This is a slide which briefly introduces SGX. Now, when I joined the exchange, I used to think of SGX as a stock exchange. But from about 7 years ago, we've had a pivot. We now are a multi-asset exchange. Cash equities now accounts for less than 30% of our revenues. And in fact, the growth areas include derivatives, fixed income, currency, and commodities, and of course, data. I come from global sales and origination. We're the market-facing team that we focus on encouraging more investments into the Singapore market and also companies to list here as well. This slide talks about the other forms of cooperation that SGX has. In the exchange world now, we do a lot of collaborations and partnerships with other exchanges. I'll just talk about a few examples. For example, we have a partnership with the New Zealand exchange, and we trade dairy products on SGX. We have a collaboration with the Stock Exchange of Thailand for the trading of depository receipts. So Singapore-listed companies listing and trading depository receipts in Thailand and vice versa. And of course, we have a number of capital raising MOUs with NASDAQ, the New York Stock Exchange, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and with Tadawul. This slide talks about Singapore as the gateway to institutional capital. Now, the statistics show from the Monetary Authority of Singapore that there is nearly 5 trillion Singapore dollars in AUM here in Singapore. And you find a huge collection, including global investors. You can see the who's who of global investors will have a presence here, whether it's BlackRock or Fidelity or Prudential. There's also a number of sovereign wealth funds. So Singapore has 2, but it's not just the Singapore wealth funds. You've got Norges, you've got the Koreans, and even the Chinese pension funds, which are here. We have a number of Chinese investors, and this is not just the QDII funds. There's a number of Chinese corporates that are heavily invested in the Singapore market. And on top of that, we can see the nationality of the depository accounts. There's more than 30,000 Chinese citizens that have custodian accounts here at the central depository. On top of that, Singapore is the gateway to South and Southeast Asia. We can see there's more than 240 Southeast Asian citizens that have depository accounts here, and more than 20,000 Indians. Importantly, Singapore has become a hub for family offices. So what is a family office? This is when the entrepreneur decides he wants to try and create a vehicle for wealth preservation purposes, amongst other objectives, and he creates the family office. Now, we've always paid close attention to this family office and high net worth segment in Singapore because it's something which makes the Singapore capital markets unique. But the numbers have changed quite substantially. In the year 2020, the Economic Development Board announced that there were about 400 single family offices that were based in Singapore. And by 2022, the Monetary Authority announced that there were 1,100 of these single family offices. So you may be wondering, what does that mean and how is this relevant? Now, the MAS statistics very specifically refer to those single family offices that have successfully applied for the 13O or 13U tax exemptions. Okay? And under these tax exemptions, there is a very specific capital deployment requirement. These single family offices would have to deploy the lesser of $10 million or 10% of their AUM into the Singapore capital markets under 3 different buckets, either equities, which are listed on an MAS-approved exchange, fixed income, or funds. Okay, so I think that's one of the interesting things about the Singapore market. We've got a large pool of family offices that have set up here in Singapore over the last 2 to 3 years, and there is a requirement for them to essentially deploy capital into SGX-listed product. So if you're thinking about your own company and you want to list or you want to fundraise, I would argue that Singapore has the right profile. It's a AAA rated country, it's geopolitically neutral, it's a trading hub, it's very well connected with the rest of the world. And on top of that, there is a very unique set of investors here in the Singapore market which have an interest to invest. Here's a slide that talks about the commodity sector. I'll talk about commodities, not just specific to mining, so you can get a better overall view. We're especially strong in agricultural commodities. We've got 14 listings, more than $25 billion in market cap. We have a number of coal companies. We have some companies in the steel value chain that are in the mining of iron ore. We have a number of companies in industrial mining, and of course, some gold. And I think the one takeaway I'd like you to have is that there's a lot of headroom for expansion. This isn't like some of the other commodity-heavy markets where you may have hundreds or even 1,000 junior miners. There's plenty of room for more mining companies to list on SGX. And we have 2 boards, a main board for established companies and a catalyst for fast-growing companies. The distinction is just branding and regulatory. Both stocks listed on either board still trade in the same cash equities market. Now, the main board has a more established branding and it tends to attract greater institutional following. The catalyst has a bit faster time to market, and when it comes to the headroom for secondary fundraising or for acquisitions and disposal, it's much easier to do that. Now, for example, if you want to make an acquisition on main board, you compare the incoming assets with your current assets, or if you exceed the 20% threshold, you need to seek shareholders' approval, which I believe is somewhat similar in other international exchanges. Whereas on Catalyst, that threshold is 50%. Similar for fundraising, if you wanted to raise more than 20% of your current share base, you need to seek shareholder approval if you're on the main board, whereas if you're on Catalyst, that threshold is 50%. And this is under your annual share mandate. The IPO review and post-IPO supervision for main board is done by SGX itself, whereas on Catalyst, these are done by a third party known as sponsors. So sponsors are licensed entities, okay, and they are registered with SGX, and they are essentially the outsourced market regulator. And every company on Catalyst needs to have a full sponsor upon listing and needs to maintain a continuing sponsor. So what are the criteria? And I'll explain this. On main board, the basic rule for all companies is that if you have at least a 3-year operating track record and have been profitable in the most recent year, you can list on SGX main board if you have a market cap of at least 150 million Singapore dollars. If you don't have that, but you have revenue, then you can also list if you have at least 300 million Singapore dollars, or if you had pre-tax profit of at least $30 million, then you can list on SGX main board as well. Now, let's say you are a mining company. You can list, if you want to list on main board, you can, as long as you have reserves and a market cap of at least 300 million Singapore dollars. Okay, so this is a special rule that we put in 2015. If we wanted to list on Catalyst, Catalyst has no standard quantitative criteria. But if you wanted to list as a mining company, you could, but you must have at least inferred resources. All right, so this is the main difference between the two boards. And also, whether it's for main board or Catalyst, you do need an independent valuation report. The resources or reserves must be reported in accordance to either JORC, NI 43101, or PERC, and valuations prepared in accordance to ValMean. So let's say your company is already listed elsewhere and you want to seek a second listing or secondary listing on SGX. In fact, many companies have done so. Here's a list of some of the prominent secondary listings that we have on SGX. The most famous one is the Jardines group of companies, $35 billion of market cap. The primary listing for Jardine Matheson, Hong Kong Lang, and DFI Retail is on the London Stock Exchange, while the secondary listing is on SGX. But more than 99% of the liquidity is on SGX, simply because their business is here in Asia. So a secondary listing could help companies. It's generally more cost efficient. You access a wider investor base and longer trading hours, and therefore you should get better price discovery. So just a couple of case studies on how SGX works with its listed companies. First up is a SGX listed company called Fortress Minerals. It listed in March 2019. In fact, they just celebrated their 5-year anniversary yesterday. And what we did was we put out a huge spread in the newspaper. So if you go and flip into your Straits Times, you'll see we got a half-page spread talking about Fortress and its journey and its stock price performance. They've done quite well. All in, total returns, I think from IPO price till today, is up 55%. We help them with non-rated research. You can see in the upper right-hand side, there's a number of articles. There's a 10 and 10. And then there's a Kopi C 10 and 10. So it's like 10 questions about the company. Kopi C is like a coffee discussion with the company C-suite. And what I find interesting about Fortress is that they are expanding to other minerals. They are taking advantage of the fact that they have access to the public markets, and they are looking for copper, nickel, and cobalt in Sabah of eastern Malaysia on the island of Borneo. So that's like an interesting growth trajectory. Southern Alliance Minerals, again, very similar. They are a Malaysian iron ore miner. They listed about 5 years ago. Again, we helped them with non-rated research, and they are also expanding outside of iron ore, looking at rare earth mines. They've discovered an ionic clay deposit in Malaysia, and they're trying to roll that into the company. So in a nutshell, we work with other listed companies. We help with the profiling. We have a very long list of mining videos. We've had mining experts from around the world come to present. We also work with corporate days. So these are like specific organized days for companies to meet with investors. And there it is. I think I finished on time. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be around if you have any questions. Look forward to it. And I'll pass the time back to Chris.